This Week in Beyond the Headlines.
I look at this FFR here and I ask myself a question. As a citizen of this country, Madam Speaker, would the former government have what I will call the financial rectitude to properly negotiate this FFR with the UK government, having regards to some of the things that we know weren't happening well over the last 4 years? It's a question. I don't know what the answer is.
The committee approved by the House of Assembly to review the protocols for effective financial management signed between the BVI and UK governments in April this year is expected to begin its appointed work shortly. 3rd District Representative Julian Fraser brought the motion to the House to appoint the review committee during the June 29th meeting. Fraser contended that the NDP government gave up too much to the UK in return for the document, which erases the requirement by the UK to pre-approve the BVI's budget. According to Fraser, it would have been better to submit the budget rather than to have signed the protocols for effective financial management.
The Premier stated that sending the budget to the United Kingdom is now a thing of the past. I would like to point out that it never happened, unless under his government in 2012, they did send the 2012 budget, but it never happened. This was a requirement. It was a proposal in the proposed document that was never negotiated by our government. But if the Premier's major trump card was to make sure that that provision was eliminated from that document, it reminds me, it is similar to someone saying to you, John, I know you're a baker, but before you put the bread in the oven, I want to see it. And you argue to no end that, no, I don't want that. But you agreed to John that you will send him the ingredients before you make the bread. John gets to see how much flour you're going to put in. You get to see how much sugar you're going to put in, how much water, how much salt, how much shortening you're going to put in the bread. Send me that. Okay, I'll agree. John says send it to me. I'll send it to him. So now you feel as if you've won because now I can make my bread and bake it and he doesn't have to see it before it's baked. What you get to do with that agreement that you have made, the only thing you get to do is to determine the shape of the bread and the size of the oven. But John was so clever, he gets to determine the size of the bread. So who's the winner? John knows what your bread's going to taste like. He knows how much bread you're going to make because he limits you to the ingredients. He limits the ingredients. But you're so smart, all you want to do is determine the size of the bread, and the shape of the bread and the size of the oven. That's what I see here. If you're going to send all this information to the British government, you might as well send them a budget.
The protocols, signed in April by Governor Boyd McCleary, Premier Dr. Orlando Smith, and Minister for Overseas Territories Henry Bellingham, was a change from the draft document presented to the VIP government in November of 2010 by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, entitled The Framework for Fiscal Responsibility, or FFR. News of the document requesting the BVI to submit its budget for pre-approval was first made public during last year's election campaign by then Deputy Premier Dancia Penn.
People should know these things because they're going to affect them and they're going to affect their children and their grandchildren. One of the proposals that is being made is that we are going to have to send our budget, our draft budget, to London every year, 2 months, before we can pass it in our House of Assembly here. And I am on record, and I don't mind saying it here, I am on record as opposing us having to send our budget to London 2 months before we need to pass it.
I agree with that.
We have managed our affairs well. We haven't done everything 100%. We could have done a lot of things better, and I myself criticized some of the things. But we, from 1977, have been budget balancing our own budget. Why do we now have to be sending it to London 2 months before for them to scrutinize it?
A major contributor to the call for the review of the BVI's budget by the UK government prior to it being passed in the local house was that the BVI had breached the borrowing guidelines agreement set out between the BVI and the UK. This was revealed by Director of Overseas Territories Colin Roberts during a visit to the territory in April last year, who stated that revenue at the time was on the verge of surpassing expenditure. He said the planning and managing of finances in the budget was necessary in order to put the BVI back on track financially.
In 2010, if I recall correctly, the focus of our discussions was on the need to, as you rightly said, make sure that expenditure and revenue were brought into balance, because I think at that time there was evidence that expenditure, without corrective action, expenditure in the BVI was going to rapidly outstrip revenue and create a growing deficit. So I say we've been working very closely with the government here since then. And we were very pleased that the government of BVI introduced a budget at the beginning of this financial year, which basically brought the public finances into balance. The BVI is still currently in breach of the liquid asset ratio in the borrowing agreement between the BVI government and the UK. But revenue has held up rather well here in BVI. And I think the focus now is, with the government's commitment to achieve and maintain balance through the planning of public finances in the budget, the focus now is, are there the right mechanisms in place in the way in which public finances are managed in the BVI that makes sure that the political decisions taken by the government in balancing the budget are actually implemented.
In an interview conducted in April this year, Financial Secretary Neil Smith explained that the UK government set up the Framework for Fiscal Responsibility document as a result of this breach.
The reason why we ran into trouble with the UK government is that the government's liquidity is not that good. So they measured, we had the previous borrowing guidelines, I think you've heard us speak about those. And there were three things that they were looking at in that. And one of those things is the cash balances. Those cash balances went below the threshold. And because of that, we had to get approvals for any other loans, any other commitments that were placed on government, external commitments, I should say. And that really is a problem. The problem is not really the outstanding loans per se, because they're okay, right? But there's the liquidity was really, I don't want to say deplorable, but not in a good position.
On November 29th, on the heels of his trip to the UK for the annual Overseas Territory Consultative Council meeting, Premier Smith said he would not sign the document and that he planned to ask the UK for time to come up with his own plan to address the country's debt and fiscal responsibility issues.
In that meeting, we discussed the major economic challenges facing the Virgin Islands. As you know, the territory has had to adhere to the borrowing guidelines. The Framework for Fiscal Responsibility is an evolution of the borrowing guidelines. One of the elements in the fiscal framework is the requirement to send the budget to the United Kingdom 2 months prior to approval. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the United Kingdom government way of calling on the government of the Virgin Islands to commit to being more fiscally responsible. Ladies and gentlemen, we did not sign the document, nor did the United Kingdom government attempt to force us to sign it. The framework was clearly proposed by the United Kingdom based on the performance of the previous administration. We made it clear that we were not prepared to just pick up from where the previous administration left off, but rather to decide on the best way forward to economic viability. I thought it was important to remind Mr. Bellingham that this was my second time as leader of the BVI, but more importantly, that after 37 years of managing our own fiscal affairs, we were not prepared to now have them manage for us. I'm happy that I was able to successfully negotiate for more time to assess the territory's financial condition and to put forward an effective strategy to restore fiscal balance and responsibility. I'm really pleased that Mr. Billingham was so receptive to our concerns and expressed Her Majesty's government desire for constructive engagement with these Virgin Islands. Representatives from the FCO are expected to visit in January of next year to discuss our various options in moving forward quickly.
Following months of negotiations by the BVI and UK, the Protocols for Effective Financial Management was signed on April 23rd. The document allows government to maintain control of its finances while guaranteeing the UK there would be enough sharing of financial information. During the signing, Minister Bellingham said the NDP government had returned the BVI to a sustainable footing financially.
These demonstrate, as you rightly pointed out, the BVI government's commitment to prudent fiscal management and returning the finances, the public finances, to a sustainable footing. And I think this is going to be welcomed throughout the BVI and indeed internationally. What you have is a world-class financial services centre here. And if that can be complemented by fiscal management that is responsible and fit for purpose, then that is going to, I think, give the BVI even more credibility. So I welcome, Honourable Premier, your commitment to revising the Public Finance Management Act to make it more robust, and I also welcome your commitment to increase transparency and improve planning and risk management. Taken together, these steps will ensure that the BVI government will have the available means to focus resources on priorities and that value for money is obtained for the people of the BVI.
In addition, Premier Smith noted that nowhere in the protocols was there a request by the UK for the BVI's budget.
In these proposals, one will not find a requirement to send the budget to the United Kingdom for approval, nor will one find a heavy, intrusive hand of a concerned big brother, but instead will find a commitment by the Virgin Islands to manage itself responsibly, and the United Kingdom government who now recognizes that the people of this territory can and will, if given the opportunity, take care of themselves responsibly. I believe that today, by the signature of this document, the Minister and Her Majesty's government, which he represents, has demonstrated a renewed confidence in this territory.
The BVI is the only UK overseas territory to have signed the Protocols for Effective Financial Management. According to Education and Culture Minister Myron Walwyn, the Premier came up with the name of the document along with its contents, which is an amendment to the FFR document.
Then when you look at the protocol for effective financial management, it came in, Madam Speaker, to the former government as a framework for fiscal responsibility. Our Premier even changed the name of the people's document that they brought to him. The name Protocol for Effective Financial Management came from our Premier. And the whole tone of the document changed because, as I said before, this framework for fiscal responsibility was very intrusive. Do this. This document here, the protocol is a different document. It's a negotiated document.
While the BVI avoided signing on the framework for fiscal responsibility, the Cayman Islands became the first British overseas territory to sign the document, despite efforts by Cayman Islands Premier McKeever Bush to negotiate out of the document. According to Walwyn, this would have been the case for the BVI had the VIP government attempted to negotiate with the UK. Walwyn said the BVI got out of signing the FFR document because of the NDP's strong financial record.
If we had a different government at that time, would they have the financial rectitude? Could they have gone out and negotiated with Britain, having regards to what was happening in the country at that time, to fight the sending of our budget to London? That's a question I don't know the answer. The whole of them could have gone to England first class. I am not sure. I cannot say with any certainty that they would have had the rectitude, the negotiating skill, because you have to negotiate from a position of strength, Madam Speaker. That's how you negotiate. You can't negotiate if you're not to negotiate on. You negotiate based on your record. You negotiate based on your record. and Dr. Smith's government had a very good record when they were in office before. And it is upon that record he had that he could have negotiated as skillfully as he did, because he had a record to stand on.
The question now is, what does avoiding the FFR and signing the protocols for effective financial management mean for the BVI? Months after signing the document, the BVI received access to the $15 million loan by the Caribbean Development Bank for repairs to infrastructure damaged during the 2010 hurricane season. The loan had been passed in the House in July last year, but was being held up by the UK government due to the breach in borrowing guidelines. In honouring its commitment to reduce expenditure, government introduced cost-cutting measures in January, which included pay cuts for elected officials and a reduction in performance increments by 50%, along with a 7% reduction in operating expenses of ministries and departments. These steps and others were all part of government's drive to reduce its spending and get the territory back on good financial ground, steps that the UK government has taken note of and commended this government on. According to the Premier, more steps will be taken in the future to ensure the territory continues on the road to better fiscal responsibility. This is Walter Barrett, Beyond the Headlines.